We hunt for treasure, stacking them in piles. Hustling hard, making deals all day. Flipping finds, turning profit our way. Pure Hustle Podcast guides our quest. Learning tricks to be the best. On eBay, we make our name. Reselling dreams, winning the game. Pure Hustle Podcast guides our quest. Learning tricks to be the best. On eBay, we make our name. Reselling dreams, winning the game. Pure Hustle Podcast.
Welcome to Pure Hustle Podcast. I'm Mike.
And this is Orlando, and we're here for another Monday mini-sode.
Yeah, that's right. Monday Mini, and we are live. And right now, we've got several people already watching. We got some people over on X/Twitter. We got people over here on YouTube and some people over in Facebook. So welcome, guys. We're so glad to have you here. Now, it is easiest for us to comment back and forth with you if you are live with us on the YouTube or the Facebook. We can directly interact with you. But wherever you're watching us, thanks for joining. Orlando, how's it going, man?
I'm doing good. And this is an interesting mini-sode because I wonder what people will think. I just want to say what's up to everybody right now in the chat. And Jay, 3 things I resold. 2 dope sons. What's going on? And I take all credit for the things that were said here right now. And then we'll see if Mike agrees. So I kind of thought about, okay, what are things that resellers always get upset about, or maybe they make a YouTube about, it becomes the rant on e-commerce bites or something. And I looked at these and I thought we should go through some of these things. These issues, they don't affect me. I don't want to say they don't affect me, but they don't bother me enough that I feel like I need to make a whole, Pure as a Podcast needs to dedicate an entire podcast to it. So I'd go through some of these and see what people thought. See if you agreed. The first one is, I'm not too concerned about rising platform fees. And I know people were after about whoa, what are you talking about? And
It's it. Turn it off. These guys are crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. But people call eBay fee-bay, and they're only there for your fees. And to me, I would rather say, hey, I am grateful that there's the ability for me to sell on eBay, Mercari, Amazon, all these platforms. And there's a few reasons why it doesn't bother me as much. First of all, it's the idea that if you keep your costs low enough, then the platform fees shouldn't bother you as much, right? And now, if you're dealing with very slim margins, let's say you're doing retail arbitrage and you're buying an item for 20 and you're selling it for 40, then you are definitely putting yourself at risk, right? You're gonna have to sell mass volume to make a profit, and some people do that. A lot of people do that on Amazon when they do FBA or they do merchant fulfilled. But I would say, for people that are doing secondary goods, if you're having an issue with the rising fees, and I get it, listen, the fees will always go up, and it could bother you, but the reality is, paying 10%, paying maybe 15%, maybe 20% to be able to put your item on a platform that reaches millions of people, not only domestically, but worldwide, and allows you a vehicle to be able to ship that item to that individual to make profit. To me, it's not too much of concern. Now, if they ever said 50% or 60%, then maybe we'll start talking about, but right now, I don't know. I'm not too bothered by rising platform fees.
Yeah. I mean, I see where you're coming from. And I think, we've made it pretty clear throughout our podcast, especially I have, as far as why I think eBay is on the wrong path with how they're making their money. They've switched to, somebody said it really good in our comment section. I need to pull it up sometime and look at that again. But they've kind of shifted their model, and now the way they're making their money, obviously the primary way they're making money is off of the sellers, right? They're not growing their platform. They're I think somebody basically said they're almost like a toll road. I think that's the way they described it. They're not growing their platform. They're not getting a huge, their user base isn't growing exponentially. I think I'd be more happy and more okay with fees increasing on a platform like eBay specifically if we saw that, hey, on top of that being part of what's raising their bottom line, some of that money that they're making is going to capturing the younger audience, going to innovating things that are going to make eBay the platform of the future, not just the platform of, yesterday and kind of right now. But at the same time, I understand what you're saying, especially when it comes to, I mean, we're all dealing with price increases everywhere. There's price increases no matter where you go. And I can only imagine, like, if you're a store owner right now and you're dealing with, you got a brick and mortar store and you're dealing with, electricity costs have gone up. All right. And water costs have gone up. Like, as everything goes up, that's going to affect your bottom line too. And so when you do see an increase in prices, if you could just take that in isolation away from maybe fewer sales and all the other issues we might be having with eBay, but just a slight increase in fees or advertisement, if you take that in isolation, that alone, it's kind of comparable to the increase of payments that everybody's experiencing across the board, no matter what you're in. And so, yeah, I could see that being like, is it really a big enough deal? Well, if you had a brick and mortar store, your fees would probably be going up way more than they currently are on eBay. Again, the scary part is if eBay doesn't find a way to switch their model where they're just making money off of a shrinking user base, focusing on that, what do they call them? The high return, the high value buyers, the ones that are buying a lot, but not really getting new people. That's where it really seems to be potentially like a long-term problem.
No, I agree. And again, I say this kind of, I don't know. It's to me, I actually do mean it. Like, I'm not too concerned about the rising platform costs, but I understand for somehow it might be an issue. And it's funny because I like how Matt here goes. Mike is about to regulate Lando shilling hard for eBay. And I appreciate it, Matt. It's been a long time. So I haven't seen you at sales in a while. I got to tell you, because there hasn't been that many sales out here. But that's for another conversation. But the funny thing is that from day one, Mike and I were talking just before the podcast went live, how back in the day, like, we were always talking about how eBay was so great. And I still think that's true. I think despite all the negativity, that we may have said on the podcast or may have taken place in the last few years with a change in CEO and changing direction, changes in the algorithm, that, hey, despite the fact that fees are where they are and now you have to add promoted listings to it, it's still a great avenue to make money. And so if you're new and you're kind of worried about the fees, don't let the fees hold you back. Think about how you can work your way into buying stuff for less. Maybe you work your way into being more efficient so you're not spending as much time listing or sourcing, because every single one of those goes into your bottom cost. If you can find a way to source efficiently, list efficiently, ship efficiently, and bring your costs way down, then definitely you're going to be able to deal with the rising costs. Now, the other one is same thing, rising shipping costs. There was a time, and I think that I'm going to add a caveat to this. I think if you sell things that are less than $20, I do think rising shipping costs will probably bother you. But if you're shipping items that are worth more than that, as long as you're making sure that, your item is something that people want, as long as you're making sure that your shipping costs are competitive, which I think you can still stay competitive, you're okay. But if you're shipping, you're selling stuff that costs just as much to ship as the item costs, that's when it becomes a problem. Like, I think psychologically something happens when somebody buys something for $4 or $5 or $10, and then they have to pay $5, $8, or $10 for shipping. Like, those are harder sales to make, right? Easier would be if you offer free shipping, but then that's a very bad model, because with that free shipping, you might end up having all your, costs eat up your profit.
Yeah. If you're running on razor fine margins, really any fee is going to just devastate you, right? Like, you've got the positive and negative of that. If you're on really fine margins, then any way you can save money is going to drastically increase because you're probably selling at a much higher volume. But then, yeah, the same thing is true as a small 2 or 3% increase in shipping fees could be devastating to your business model. Whereas, yeah, if you're selling, on a much higher margin, then that's not going to hit you as hard. One of the things too, I mean, we always have issues. I mean, just today in our Discord, we've seen some people talking about some shipping issue stuff. It happens, right? Like, you're always going to have issues. We've always had this horror stories with FedEx and sometimes UPS and USPS. I mean, who knows where it goes and why it circles around the country and never arrives and it gets stuck in a distribution center for a while. So those things do happen. But the reality is, I think if you look at the way shipping works now, there have been a lot of improvements, right? Like the fact that it's pretty easy to track stuff now compared to how it used to be. You used to have to pay a lot of extra money to track things. Now it's much easier to do. Things 99% of the time are going to arrive reliably on time. Sometimes things are going to be late, but when it is, people tend to be okay with that. So, increase in fees, again, like you've got to consider it's just the increase in price of everything as fuel goes up, as labor costs go up. Like those fees are going to go up. And so the hard part is, as resellers, if we can't increase our profits also at some level, yeah, that's going to hit us hard. But then again, it gives some of us that motivation of, okay, how do I need to shift? Do I need to be selling in a different niche? Do I need to be sourcing from a different place or a different type of item? So that way I'm not going to be as affected by rising increases. And yeah, an increase of a few percent a year, if you can continually grow your business, it's not going to be the end of the world. All right, Orlando, I think you might have froze there. Are you there?
Yeah. Then that means they sold a lot of stuff. And I agree with that. That's kind of like, when I used to sell on Amazon, I used to have these huge fees, like these huge, it was like keeping stuff in I forget what it was called, but it was the fee for like having stuff in the warehouse. And sometimes I would buy a ton of stuff and I would buy it back in, let's say, September, and it would sit in the warehouse till like November. And I would have, I'm talking about, I would have thousands of dollars in fees. And I remember people would be like, "Orlando, that's crazy. Like, you're not selling your stuff." But I knew that cost was worth it to me, because by the time we got to December, like all that stuff would be sold and I would have a lot of profit. So part of it is, if you're paying a lot of fees and a lot of shipping costs, that means that you're making a lot of sales, right? They're equivalent. Like you can say, "Hey, I'm okay having a few sales here and not paying a lot of shipping and fees," but in the end, is that helping you in the long run? So, it's just kind of picker. You have an interesting comment here. You said, number one rule of business: know your numbers. If your profit margin allows it to help your customers, easier to retain customers and to go find new ones. So my question though is, does that work with the eBay model? Like, do we have? I know some people may have, but I don't know. What do you think, Mike? You think, or Susquehanna, you can comment again. Do you think in general people have the same customers? Like, do we all, like? I know eBay talks very much about the enthusiastic buyer. I'm not 1,000% sold on the enthusiastic buyer. I think there's a handful, but I don't see how common that is on eBay.
Yeah, if you're really niched down, and like you sell Pokemon cards or you sell some type of collectible item, and you can have a base of buyers who are going to be return buyers, I absolutely agree with that. Especially with, I think that's good, especially with something like sales. If we think of a salesperson, sometimes it's better to eat a little bit of the profit and have a customer who's going to be a customer for life. It goes back to a video that I watched a while back where somebody was talking to an owner of a restaurant, and he basically gave that example of the first time somebody comes in, if you find out it's their first time in the restaurant, they have them, stick the receipt or something in a special way on the table. So that way the owner or the manager knows to come up and ask them about how it's going, and then offer them something free. Like, hey, how about a free dessert on us? And then at the end, when the dinner's over, they write a little note on there like, hey, bring this back next time you come and we'll give you a free entree on us. And if you can get 3 positive experiences with that customer, then you have them for life. Like they will always rave about your restaurant. They'll always want to come back to that restaurant. And he says you are out by the time it's all said and done, you're out like $40 for that customer, because you gave them a free entree, a free dessert, and maybe like a free meal over 3 different visits. But then you have them for life. And so eating that little bit of cost there was worth it. But yeah, Orlando, going back to your point, if you're just like a garage sale type seller where you're going to a garage sale, you're picking up random items, then it's harder to have that type of a feedback and loop with a customer constantly coming back. But I do think that it does relate to your reputation as a seller. If you can constantly sell stuff at a decent price, people come to your store and are leaving good feedback. You're constantly getting positive feedback. You're constantly getting no complaints on your store. Then in the long run, that is going to help you. And I think that could be worth its weight in gold, more than you might have lost on, I could have made an extra $200 this year, but instead I have an extra 200 positive reviews, and next time I call eBay, they're much more likely to help me because, you know, I've got all these things that have moved through, you know, so that potentially could be a benefit of that.
Good old calling eBay. So I don't know, that's for another episode. All right, returns. Returns is another thing. It doesn't bother me. I would say because I barely deal with returns. Like it is the rarity that I will get, you know, killed with returns. Now there are those moments, right? Things ebb and flow, and sometimes, you know, I do have those like that weekend that I don't know where I get hit with all these big returns. But the reality is, I don't get that many. You know, a lot of people are scared of doing returns, right? And the reason they're scared of doing returns is because they're like, oh man, I'm gonna be out of profit. I'm not gonna do so well. And so the reality is that, you know, if you open up returns, right, the numbers overwhelmingly tell you that people will feel more confident, people will be more willing to buy, and in the long run it's just going to help you out. And maybe the, you know, amount that you'll lose will farly diminish. Farley, I don't know if that's your word. Will will diminish when you take a look at how much profit you made in sales as a return of bringing that buyer confidence. So I'm not too concerned about returns.
Yeah, I think that same philosophy that we kind of just talked about applies here too, in that I think you might see a big enough increase in the number of sales you have to make up for the handful of returns you're going to have, right? If your listing is competitive with everybody else price wise, the pictures are the same, the item condition is the same, and you offer free returns, or you offer at least returns, maybe not free returns, but you offer returns, and your competitor doesn't, you're more likely to get those sales. So if you get an extra, let's say just round number, you get an extra 100 sales a year because you're offering returns, and you have to do 5 extra returns that year, it's not even comparable. Like you've totally come out ahead on that. Now, again, is it possible that you have that one instance where the return you have could sink you, right? It was a big item, they broke it, and it's really messed you up. Sure, it could, or shipping costs are really high, but I think that's more likely to be the exception than the rule, right? It does happen, but I think you're going to get enough more sales by offering returns than you will lose in profit as you get a handful of returns back on items. So I definitely think it's not worth stressing over doing the returns. I was very hesitant. I did not want to do returns. The only reason I really started doing returns is years ago when we went to eBay Open, and they mentioned, you know, if you're a top rated seller and you offer returns, 30-day return, doesn't have to be free returns, then you get additional seller protections. And it was like, you know what? Okay, it's worth it for that. Let's try it. And I would say I have the same number of returns I ever had, because if somebody really wants to return something, they're just going to INAT it and they're going to return it, and you're going to take a hit on your account instead of just, you know, potentially taking a little bit of hit to your pocketbook by offering returns if they're not happy with something.
Yeah, agreed. And again, the thing with returns is, you know, you can choose to focus on the returns, but just choose on listing more, choose on sourcing well, choose on making it happen, because it, you know, it is the industry standard, right? It's the way everyone does things, and it's been proven time and time again to be successful. So don't get caught up too much on those returns. Now, this other one I think people might find controversial. I'm not too concerned with the amount of resellers, and let me say why. A lot of people have been talking, and I think people have actually gone on Terapeak and like done the numbers, and I don't exactly know how to find out how many sellers are on eBay comparison to buyers. Now, there is a curve eventually where, like, if you have way too many sellers in comparison to buyers, then it's going to cause a problem. But I don't think we're anywhere close to that at all. And there's a few reasons why. Number one is eBay's reach is global. Amazon's reach is even global. The second one is, if you're buying items that are in demand, it doesn't matter how many sellers. What matters is how many of those items there are, right? And so if you're able to pick up those items that are in demand, you should be okay. The other part is, I do believe that eBay, you know, wants the best resellers on there, right? They want the resellers that have great listings. They want the resellers that offer, you know, top-rated seller service, great customer service. And so as long as you're doing those things, you're always going to be separated from the crowd. You're not going to be thrown in. You know, things have changed a little bit on eBay. I'll admit, you know, like concierge doesn't mean what it used to. You know, calling eBay doesn't really help you. But in the long run, as a reseller, somebody has been selling for 10 plus years, it hasn't mattered how many resellers are. What's mattered more is what I'm sourcing, and, you know, basically, am I adapting to the market? That's way more important than the amount of resellers that are out there.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think, one of the statistics that's pretty crazy, but I understand why. Like new teachers, like in the teaching field, it's like a 5-year lifespan, and that's the average, which means a lot of them are dropping out after their first year before their first year's over, right? So a lot of people in that field drop out early, and I think reselling in a lot of ways is the same way. I think it is an amazing tool. I think that it is probably one of the best side hustles that you can have, or a best full-time job to move into if you want to have some freedom. But it's also hard, right? Like it's not this just easy quick thing that anybody can do without any work or any prep or any training. It's not for everyone. And so I think that the turnover rate on resellers is going to be pretty high. And so yeah, there may be seasons where there's an influx. Like there's a whole bunch of sellers new to the platform, and then a year later, where did they all go? You're going to have this huge turnover rate. Going back to that teacher example, when I first met my wife's family, my sister-in-law had gotten furloughed from her job because there were too many teachers in California.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine that? Too many teachers in California, and now we're at the point where they can't find teachers.
No.
They're like begging. They're
Yeah.
like pulling people off the street. Like, hey, can you read and write? Sweet, you're a teacher now. And so it's almost like that with reselling. Like, there's seasons where it's like, yeah, everybody jumps on. It's a lot of extra competition. But how many of these 18-year-olds who watched a couple TikToks, who go into a Goodwill bins a couple of times, are going to actually stick around? I don't think it's something to be concerned about.
Yeah, agreed. All right. So I'm gonna pull up Susquehanna Picker one more time because it kind of aligns with the last thing we're gonna talk about is social media sharing. Now, there's two ways to look at it. There's one social media sharing, which is like, hey, source these items, right, and you'll make profit. Right. And a lot of people don't like that, especially people have been reselling for a while, because they'll say, hey, you're killing the market. This was something that I always would source, and now it's done. Like, I can't do that anymore. Right. I remember in the early days of podcasts, I didn't want to share about Cricut, because back in the day, Cricut, CRICUT, like the sharing, crafts, whatever, the printers and the cartridges, because I really thought like we had the angle on the market here in San Diego. But the reality is everybody knew about that. Like, it was just, I was the one that was concerned about it. And the other side is what Susquehanna Picker here is saying thoughts on YouTube resellers. I am, but oftentimes I see them misrepresent how easy eBay is or reselling is. All right, so let's attack both of those. The first one, okay, I am not concerned about how much is shared, with one exception, and the exception is Amazon, hot items and bolos and all that during Q4. I think those sharing on social media will kill the market. It will kill the market, because the reality is those are only seasonal items. Those are items that people are just looking for at that moment in time. And so all it takes is one person with, let's say, a following of 10,000 to share it. And there's only like 10 people on the listing on Amazon. And then you end up getting like another 20 or 30 or 40. You're going to have race to the bottom. So I would say on Amazon, it does bother me. As far as eBay, when it comes to secondary goods, it doesn't bother me, because what are the chances that somebody can go to a store and find the exact item, right? If somebody says, hey, I found this Harley Davidson 3D emblem hog shirt, like, okay, well, I've never seen one my entire life. I've never picked up Filson my entire life. There's some grails. A Coogee sweater has been shared how many times on social media, whether it be TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and I've never been able to find it. So I'm not too worried about the secondary market. But I will say on the Amazon, it gets kind of crazy, because it's all about access. If it's something that people can easily access, that's when it becomes a problem on social media, when people start sharing.
Yeah. But then again, you got to think of, like, there are those people who are willing to chase clout and fame more than they are money. And so they're okay with sharing it. But you also got to realize, like, by the time people have shared something online, most of the time, the market's already dead. Like, they've already moved on to something else, and they're profiting. If they could profit on that item and it was easy to do, they would be doing that item and not sharing about it. But they're sharing about it because they can get some revenue that way, and they've already moved on to something else they haven't shared yet. And so, yeah, I think that a lot of times when people see that their market has been busted, it's not just because it's been shared, but it's because it's already gotten the spotlight. Like, people are realizing it's there, so then it starts getting shared. Now, again, there are going to be those people who, they don't care. They'd be happy to lose a bunch of potential money just so they can get an extra, few hundred followers or something like that. But yeah, and then the other thing is, you mentioned the YouTube resellers, and to be honest, I don't watch a ton. I don't consume a ton of reselling content. Here and there, there's a handful of followers I really enjoy, or producers I really enjoy, and I'll watch their stuff. But when it comes down to it, I think a lot of people, again, going back to what I was saying, they present it as easy because two things sell, right? One thing that sells is extreme negativity. Like if you just came on and all you were doing is just saying nothing but negative stuff all the time, you're going to get a certain group of people who just like to, have that cathartic, release of I'm angry. We're all angry about this thing. But the other thing that sells really well is almost the get rich quick schemes and the like, look how easy this is. Because it's harder to get somebody to listen to Pure Hustle podcast when we say what I said earlier, which is, hey, you can do this, but this is actually really hard. Someone's going to go, yeah, I'm going to go watch this guy over here who says, I'm going to teach you how to become a millionaire in 3 days. So, but the reality is we're trying to show the real side of reselling, like what people really go through. Somebody was just talking about being up late all night. Here we got, I'm up all night packing a 1950s record player and questioning my sourcing decisions, right? That's the side of reselling that isn't always shown on YouTube. Man, this is going to take forever. The bubble wrap and packing this and did this work? And I had to test it, but you might end up making $300-400 profit off of something like that. And it's worth it, but it's not this just get rich quick scheme, which I think is what a lot of people sell because they end up being able to monetize their followers more than they are able to make money reselling.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I will say, there's a lot of misrepresentation, but like you said, that's what gets people to watch a video, right? I mean, it's one of the things that we get commented on. If you go look at our iTunes comments, is like, oh, Mike and Orlando, like, they've been negative lately, or they affected my mindset, or and then we'll get people that always will say, oh, I really appreciate the honesty and the authenticity. And so you kind of got to look at it, it depends on what you're looking for, right? And I've said from day one, the reason we've done the podcast, one of the many reasons, not the primary reason, but one of the many reasons, has been to show the true side of reselling. Mike and I have always said that we are documenting. We're not gurus. We don't have all the answers, but we're documenting, right? And if you follow our podcast from episode 1 to episode 412, you'll see an ebb and flow. You'll see the beginning where we're super pumped and everything's great. Mike is just starting. And then you'll hear the whole, oh man, we're getting to kind of like the era in 2020. What's going to happen? Is this going to be the end of reselling? And then it spikes and we're like, yes, this is the best time ever to do reselling. And then the market tanks. And then we started talking about that. And so there are seasons in reselling. And it seems to me that there is not a lot of freedom on social media to share the seasons. I think it's very polarized. It's either one, you're either really negative, and there are those channels that are super negative, and I think they misrepresent eBay and reselling by just focusing on the negative, and that's all they ever talk about while they're making all this YouTube revenue and they're making all this eBay revenue. Okay. But then there's the other side that they're all positive, right? And so they get all these people charged up, they sell a few courses, they get everybody on board, but the reality is they're not great resellers. They're just great at like somebody said here, shilling, reselling, shilling their course, shilling eBay, and so they make that money. So to me, it's you kind of got to find. We've said this since day one. You got to find what works for you, right? That's the bottom line. Like I watch certain YouTubers because either one, they give me information that I may have missed and they're on top of topics, or two, I kind of just enjoy what they do. I really don't follow any YouTubers that are always positive. I'm not a fan of those guys, but I'm also not a fan of the guys that are always negative. Like to me, it just I might as well just stop reselling. So that's just where I'm at. So I don't know. I would say focus on your business, but if you're listening for entertainment, watching for entertainment, then I think it's okay. If you're truly trying to get guidance, I think it gets kind of tricky, because I can tell you, even behind the scenes, I know some resellers, and the only reason that they pull in numbers is because of the audience that they have. They also, even if they have a bad month, that's okay, because their Patreon pays for their bad month and they're okay for that. It doesn't matter, right? Or like you said, Mike, Like when they go sourcing on YouTube, they make more money from that video sourcing on YouTube than they make from the items that they pick up. And so to them, it's worth it to drop 400, 1,000, 2,000, or whatever money they drop on an item. So just be aware of that. Hey, this was the longest mini-sode we've ever had. We're approaching 30 minutes. Like it's almost like a full podcast. But I want to say thank you everyone for joining us. Tune in to our long form podcast that drops on Wednesday. And look forward to seeing you all again on live next week. And with that being said, make sure to be real,
Be relevant,
and be reselling late.
peace.
Sunshine.